Welcome to part 4 of my War of the Spark spoiler review, and we're kicking things off today with Bulwark Giant. It's 5 and a white for a 3/6 giant soldier, and when it enters the battlefield you gain 5 life. So this card can be used as a curve topper in a limited deck to fill out your deck, but in standard it is a little bit weak to see play. I'm gonna have to go ahead and give it a 1 spark rating. Next white card is Defiant Strike, 1 white mana for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 till end of turn, and you draw a card. So this is a limited combat trick and not a particularly good one at that. It does allow a creature to trade sometimes, but it will not protect it from anything. As for standard, this is unplayable and it gets a 1 spark rating. Grateful Apparition is 1 and a white for a creature spirit. It's a 1/1 with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you proliferate. So this is probably not going to be good enough for standard. I think it is a little bit on the weak side. 2 mana 1/1 flyer. The ability can be very good, especially in a deck that's looking to proliferate, but until we see something like that, I'm going to give this a 1 spark rating. Loxodon Sergeant. It is a 4 mana 3/3 elephant soldier with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control gain vigilance till end of turn. So this is a limited card. It can be quite good at helping you to win races. When you play a card like this, you can chip in for extra damage, but still be able to block. As for standard, the stats are a little bit low for that effect, and there are other ways to gain that more efficiently. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. This card won't see any play in standard. Next up is Makeshift Battalion. It's 3 mana for a 3/2 human soldier at common, and whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Note that this is in the same colors as Proliferate, so that could be relevant there. I also love that it's called a Makeshift Battalion, and the ability to, well, when 3 creatures attack to do something, that was actually called Battalion, and it was from Gatecrash, so I love the reference to that there. As for standard, this card isn't good enough and gets a 1 spark rating. Pouncing Lynx is 1 and a white for a 2/1 creature cat, and as long as it's your turn, it has first strike. Unfortunately, the Lynx is a little weak to see standard play. The current White Weenies deck has a lot more powerful options at 2, so it definitely wouldn't be interested in this card. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. It won't see any play. Single Combat is 3 white for a sorcery at rare. Each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Then players can't cast creatures or planeswalkers until the end of your next turn. So this is a throwback to Cataclysm, which was a spell from Exodus, which has a very similar ability, though it does affect other card types. So it was a hell of a lot more brutal and a lot cheaper. So you can see we've come a long way since then in terms of making the game fun to play, I guess. In terms of standard, I don't know if this is the sort of effect that you're going to want. If you're getting beat down by 1 creature or your opponent has 1 problematic planeswalker, this card kind of just does nothing. So based on that, I am going to give it a 1 spark rating. I don't think it's going to see play, but it is a very powerful effect. So next up is a card I'm super excited about for older formats. It is Tomic Distinguished Advocist. White for a legendary creature, human advisor, 2/3 with flying. Lands on the battlefield and land cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control, and your opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. So in standard, this isn't going to see a lot of play. Interacts with Crucible of Worlds, but that's kind of about it. So for standard, it's going to get a 1 spark rating. However, in older formats where cards such as Life from the Loam are played and are key cards in certain strategies, I can see this card being very effective. A deck like Death and Taxes in Legacy would love to get its hands on this to shut down the lands matchup. Apart from that though, I'm not sure where else it goes, but it does have sideboard written all over it, and I'm sure this card's going to show up in a lot of older formats going forward. For that, I would give it a 4 spark rating because it is a very playable sideboard card, but again, it's probably not something you're going to see in a main deck. Onto blue, and our first card is Rescuer Sphinx. It is 2 blue for a 3/2 flying creature Sphinx. When it enters the battlefield, you may return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is a card that allows you to rebuy enters the battlefield effects. It also plays nicely into the Proliferate theme that is in these colors. As for standard, unfortunately the stats for the mana cost just aren't good enough in the decks that would be in these colors, so it will receive a 1 spark rating. Next up is Spellkeeper Weird. It is 2 and a blue for a 1/4 creature weird, and you can pay 2 mana, tap and sack it, and return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a little bit on the weaker side again for constructor playability, so it will get a 1 spark rating there. In terms of limited, these sort of effects can be quite good, especially if you have a very powerful instant or sorcery spell you want to rebuy. Stealth Mission is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. That creature can't be blocked this turn. So this is a limited finisher more than anything else. It's not a card that we're going to be looking at in standard, and it will get a 1 spark rating. Aid the Fallen is next. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Choose one or both. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Return target planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. Couple of options there, and if you can do both, it can be 2 mana draw 2, sort of. It is definitely a card more focused for limited again. We are getting a lot of those today, but keep in mind a lot of the set is designed for limited. Not everything will see standard play. For that, it will get a 1 spark rating. Do keep in mind that it's in the format because it is a great way to recur a couple of things, maybe out of a sideboard in a grindier matchup. Banehound is next. It is black for a 1/1 Nightmare Hound with lifelink and haste. I think that's about as powerful as you can make a common in this game, and I think it probably has what it takes to see some play in standard. There is a mono black aggro deck that is picking up traction at the moment, and I definitely think this card could be a role player in that deck. For that, I'm going to give it a 3 spark rating. Next up is Massacre Girl, 3 black for a 4/4 legendary creature human assassin with menace. When Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. This card is an absolute monster. In a mid-range deck such as Sultai, coming in out of the sideboard in a mirror or against another mid-range or aggressive deck, it'll come into play and it may just clear your opponent's board. It then sticks around and becomes extremely difficult to deal with because being legendary makes it immune to cast down and menace makes it extremely hard to block. I also really like this card out of the sideboard of, say, a control deck where it can come down again against an aggro or mid-range deck, kill most of the creatures if not all of the creatures they have in play, but then it also makes the removal spell from those decks even stronger as they may chain together to kill multiple things later on. I think this card is an absolute powerhouse. I'm going to give it a 5 spark rating and I expect to see a lot of play in standard. Last black card for today is Sorin's Thirst. It is black for an instant and it deals 2 damage to target creature and you gain 2 life. This is a powerful little removal spell, great for the early game and especially great considering Moment of Craving is leaving standard at the end of the year. It may not see play now, but I definitely will see play in the future and I'm going to give this a 3 spark rating. Moving on to red, and we have Blind Blast. It is 2 and a red. For an instant, Blind Blast deals 1 damage to target creature. That creature can't block this turn and draw a card. So this is another limited card. It's not going to see any standard play and will get a 1 spark rating. I guess its use is to push through some damage, maybe finish your opponent off, or you can cycle it early game and punch in for a little bit. Devouring Hellion is a 3 mana 2/2 creature Hellion. As it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice any number of creatures and or planeswalkers you control. If you do, it enters with twice that many +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a reference to Devour, which was an old Magic mechanic where you would sacrifice creatures when a creature came into play to put +1/+1 counters on it. So is that going to be any good? Well, the good Devour creatures tend to be a little bit more powerful than this. This is clearly a draft card and will get a 1 spark rating in standard. Cyclops Electromancer is a 5 mana 4/2 Cyclops Wizard, which is a fantastic creature type, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So this is a payoff card for a blue-red spells deck in limited. Unfortunately, it is a little bit weak for standard and will get a 1 spark rating there. Not a lot to see here. Goblin Assailant is a 2 mana 2/2 Goblin Warrior, gets a 1 spark rating. This card is definitely not good enough for standard. I'm not really that happy with it in my draft deck either. Goblin Assault Team is next. It is 3 and a red for a 4/1 Goblin Warrior with haste. When it dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Another limited card, so it will get a 1 spark rating. I mean, it comes down, it hits them hard, and then it leaves a counter behind if they trade. And this thing will generally trade with anything that's on the battlefield. If they don't trade, I guess you just keep hitting them for 4 until they do. Yeah, this card seems fine in limited, but again, 1 spark rating for standard, just not good enough there. Heartfire is 1 and a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. Heartfire deals 4 damage to any target. So the power level is definitely there. 2 mana deal 4 is very, very strong, but the cost is also very, very real. If there's a deck that wants this, I could see it being quite good. I'm going to give it a 2 spark rating based purely on that power level, and we have seen effects like this played in standard in the past. Mizzium Tank is our first vehicle for the set. It's 1 red for an artifact vehicle. It's 3/2 when it is crewed, and it has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Mizzium Tank gets +1/+1 and becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. It also has crew 1. So interesting card here. So 3 mana 3/2 vehicle with crew 1. Crew 1 on anything is usually very, very good because it makes it very simple to get something in there and get this thing attacking. But that first line of text where whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets bigger and bigger but also becomes a creature until end of turn, I think is super powerful. I could see this seeing some play in decks like the Phoenix decks that are already trying to throw a lot of spells around. It's kind of resilient because it's not always a creature. You can cast an instant like an Opt on your opponent's turn and use it as a blocker if you need to, or on your own turn when you are trying to get a Phoenix back, it is just another big threat to get in with. I quite like this card and I'm going to give it a 4 spark rating. Nahiri's Stoneblades, 1 and a red for an instant, up to 2 target creatures, each get +2/+0 till end of turn. So pretty simple offensive combat trick. Again, like the white one we saw earlier, it's not going to save your creatures from combat, but it can push through a ton of damage and allow smaller things to trade up. As for standard, it's a little bit weak and it will get a 1 spark rating. Spellgorger Weird is 2 and a red for a 2/2 creature weird, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on Spellgorger Weird. So it's kind of like permanent prowess on this guy. 3 mana 2/2 though is unfortunately a little bit on the weaker side for standard playability. This is mainly a limited card that plays into a blue-red spells deck, so for standard it's going to get a 1 spark rating. On to green, and we have Band Together. It is 2 and a green for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures you control deal damage equal to their power to another target creature. So it's a one-sided fight spell, but it's instant speed and 2 of your creatures get to team up to take down something bigger. For limited, this is pretty much as good as it gets for green removal, but unfortunately in standard it is a little bit too expensive. For that reason, I am going to have to give it a 1 spark rating. I did also want to point out the similarity of this card to 2 other cards that we've had in standard over the last couple of years, which were Aetherworks Marvel and Emrakul the Promised Land. Coincidentally, both these cards were also banned together. Bloomhulk is 3 and a green for a 4/4 creature plant elemental with fantastic artwork. When it enters the battlefield, you proliferate. This is unfortunately another limited card, so it will get a 1 spark rating for standard. Next up is another spell for limited for the proliferate deck. It is Courage in Crisis, 2 and a green sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then proliferate. So it's a good way to get counters onto things that didn't already have them, and then a great way to duplicate those counters. Unfortunately for standard, it is far too slow to see play, and we'll get a 1 spark rating. Evolution Sage is 2 and a green for a 3/2 creature. It's an elf druid, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you proliferate. So it's a pretty interesting card. Baseline power level, 3 mana 3/2. It's a little bit weak, but I've seen worse stats on utility creatures. In terms of that effect though, whenever you play a land proliferate, I could see this doing a lot of work in a deck like Sultai. There's Merfolk Branchwalkers, Hydro Krasis, Jadelight Rangers, Wildgrowth Walkers, a lot of cards that have +1/+1 counters on it, and that's also a deck that plays multiple different Planeswalkers. If it is going to see play anywhere, it's most likely going to be that deck, so I'm going to give it a 3 spark rating. Pollen Bright Druid, 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, choose one. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or proliferate. So I like modal cards, I like being given choices, I think that makes for great sort of gameplay. I think the choices here are a little bit weak for standard play, so I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. If however there is a proliferate deck that just wants maximum amount of proliferate cards, I could see this being one of the options for a deck like that. Primordial Worm, 4 green for a 7/6 creature worm. So this is just your big dumb curve topper for your limited decks. I guess Colossal Dreadmaw was busy, so they traded the trample for an extra point of power. Needless to say, this gets a 1 spark rating in standard. Last green card is Ward Scale Crocodile. It is 5 mana for a 5/3 crocodile with a hexproof. For standard, this thing's a little bit clunky, but for limited, this is a finisher. We've seen cards like this in the past, just a big dumb green hexproof creature or a blue hexproof creature, and they can run away with games, especially if there's any auras or equipment that are well costed and you can put on your crocodile safely and just keep hitting your opponent and there's nothing they can do about it. For limited, it's probably going to be very good because in the past cards like this have been, but for standard, it does get a 1 spark rating. Next up is Death Sprout. It's 1 black green for an instant, destroy target creature, search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So it's definitely a powerful card. It really just depends on whether the decks that would want this effect can actually fit it at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3 spark rating. I think it is good enough to see some standard play, whether it be 1 or 2 copies here or there, or maybe even post-rotation. It is also worth noting that it combos really well with the Evolution Sage that is also in this set, because you can kill an opponent's creature and then proliferate at instant speed, making your blocks really good. Leyline Prowler, 1 green for a Nightmare Beast. It has Death Touch, Lifelink, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color. So this is an interesting card. It's definitely a wall. It will stop your opponent from attacking you. It does add mana, which is very nice too. It can stabilize and erase with the Lifelink and the Death Touch ability, but do all those things add up to a card worth playing in standard? I'm not entirely sure. I can't really see where you'd want to put this at the moment, even though it does have a lot of powerful abilities. I'm going to give it a 2 spark rating. I think think it could see a little bit of play. I just don't think it has a place right now. Mayhem Devil is 1 black-red for a 3/3 creature devil, and whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So this is the sort of thing that could be quite powerful in a sacrifice deck. However, there really isn't a deck like that in Standard at the moment. It is kind of powerful, but I don't see it seeing any play, so I am going to give it a 1 spark rating. Merfolk Skydiver, green-blue for a 1/1 Merfolk Mutant with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and you can pay 5 to proliferate. So this might just be the 2-drop that the Merfolk deck in Standard is currently looking for. At its baseline, 2 mana 2/2 flying is quite good. Tribal synergies, of course, with the rest of the deck. You can put the counter somewhere more relevant if you do draw this late, and if you do have it late, you can pay for that proliferate ability to add more counters to your Merfolk, which generally in Standard already have counters on them. I think this card's super sweet, and I'm going to give it a 3 spark rating, even though that Merfolk deck, yeah, maybe tier 2, tier 3, but this might be what it needs to push it further up the rankings. Nihiri, Storm of Stone, is 4 mana for a 6 loyalty uncommon planeswalker. As long as it's your turn, creatures you control have first strike, and equip abilities cost 1 less to activate. And then also -X, Nihiri deals X damage to target tapped creature. So this one's on the weaker side. I'm mainly looking at the tick down, and is 4 mana to deal 6 damage to tapped creatures good enough? You can split it up, which is nice, but I think it is a little weak, especially with that restriction to only tapped creatures. The first strike is also quite nice, but the equip cost thing, probably not super relevant in Standard. This thing's going to be a powerhouse in Limited. You'll be able to kill multiple creatures with it, which is awesome, but in Standard it's going to get a 1 spark rating. Neoform, green-blue for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converter mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's converter mana cost. Put that card on the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter, then shuffle your library. So this is Vanafar's ability, or the Birthing Pot ability as people like to call it, but you get a +1/+1 counter as well. Now, initially I thought this card was quite good until I realized it was a sorcery, so you are unable to save a creature from removal and upgrade it in the process. If there's a combo deck that is looking to churn through the library and spit creatures out of different costs, this could be something that I'd be interested in, but as it stands right now, it is a 1 spark card. Role Reversal is blue-blue-red for a sorcery. Exchange control of 2 target permanents that share a type. This card's pretty weak. I mean, it's very conditional in what it does, but it can be very powerful. You can swap your awful uncommon planeswalker for your opponent's absolutely amazing about to ultimate one, but I mean, that's the absolute high end. On the low end of this card, they don't have a thing you have, and it does absolutely nothing, and it's dead in your hand. I'm going to give it a 1 spark rating. I don't think this card's very good. Sorin, Vengeful Bloodlord, is 2 white-black for a 4 loyalty planeswalker at rare. As long as it's your turn, creatures and planeswalkers you control have lifelink. Not bad. +2, Sorin deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. It's not the best ability, but it does tick up +2, which is a lot of loyalty. And then -X, return target creature card with converter mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. It becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. It's also got lifelink from his first ability. So that -X is generally how he'll try to protect himself. You tick him down, reanimate a 3-drop, you've got a Sorin on 1, and then you can start ticking it up the next turn with a protective creature with lifelink. I think this card is super powerful. I'm going to give it a 4 spark rating. I think this is definitely going to see some play in some mid-range strategies. Also worth noting that it combos pretty well with Kaya's Ghost Form. You can play your Sorin, put the Ghost Form on it, tick down -4, reanimating a 4-drop, Sorin dies, Kaya's Ghost Form returns to play, and then you can tick it up or tick it back down and reanimate another big creature. 10th District Legionnaire is red-white for a 2/2 human soldier with haste, and whenever you cast a spell that targets it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1. Now, this card is very, very similar to Battlewise Hoplite, which was a card that saw a lot of play during the Theros Standard, though Battlewise had a dedicated heroic deck, and 10th District Legionnaire does not. There is a red-white aggressive deck that does show up from time to time, and this card would slot into that quite nicely. However, that deck doesn't run a lot of ways to target its own creatures, so you may miss out on a lot of the advantage of having this card in your deck. I think the power level is there, I'm just not sure where it goes. I think the power level is there, I'm just not quite sure where it goes yet, but I will give it a 2 spark rating. Tulsimer, Friend to Wolves, is 5 mana for a 3/3 legendary creature Elf Scout. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 3/3 green and white wolf creature token, and then whenever a wolf enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and have that creature fight a creature an opponent controls. Unfortunately, I think it is just a little bit slow and clunky to see some play in Standard. Maybe if we get more wolves in future sets, this card could become very, very good, but as it stands right now, it gets a 1 spark rating. God Pharaoh's Statue is a 6 mana legendary artifact. Spells your opponent's cast cost 2 less to cast. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. So taxation effects like this can be very, very powerful if they are played at the correct time. Unfortunately for this card, the correct time is generally in the early stages of the game, so you can stifle your opponent's development. At 6 mana, I think your opponent's probably done everything they want to, and this effect probably won't do too much. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 1 spark rating. Iron Bully is a 3 mana 1/1 artifact creature golem. It has menace, and when it enters the battlefield, it puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Note that it can go on any creature, not just a creature you control, though I don't think that is relevant. This card is very, very weak. It's probably just a colorless way so that you can play with Proliferate in Limited. As for Standard, it gets a 1 spark rating. It's not going to see any play. And on to our last card for today, it's Mobilized District. It is a non-basic land at rare, it taps for a colorless mana, and you can pay 4. Mobilized District becomes a 3/3 citizen creature with vigilance until end of turn. It's still a land. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature and planeswalker you control. So this card looks pretty powerful. On its baseline, it's a fantastic way to win the game without having to commit resources to the board. In the past, creature lands have been very, very powerful, played in both aggressive strategies and controlling strategies. We've seen cards like Mutavault see play in control decks in the past, so that those decks didn't have to run dedicated win conditions and can spend their time and resources controlling the game and then finishing their opponent off with the creature land. Now this one does cost a little bit more to activate at 4, though these control decks that would be interested in this sort of card do play planeswalkers, and it can reduce that cost down to 3, maybe even 2 mana. Plus the land has vigilance, so it kind of pays for itself. You can attack with it and then use it on your opponent's turn to cast a counter spell or a removal spell or something like that. I think this card is absolutely fantastic, and I'm going to give it a 5 spark rating. So from everything we've seen today, I think this is the card that I am most excited to play with, but what are you guys looking forward to? Leave a comment below and let me know. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss more videos like this one. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you next time.